For centuries, humans looked up at the clouds and soaring birds in awe and envy. Their hearts yearned to join them, to know the freedom of flight. Generations of visionaries and inventors dreamed of machines that would free them from earthly boundaries and send them soaring into the heavens. But it was not until two bicycle builders in Ohio realized that it would be easier to equal birds in knowledge than nature in her machinery, that the flight path to mastery was clear. Today, we have learned many ways to fly. We left the ground. We shrank the globe. We took a giant step like no step before.
Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon.
The story of our struggle to leave the ground and stay there is embodied in the machines that carried us. It is the story of reckless daredevils and eccentric geniuses, of gleaming metal and graceful curves. From crazy contraptions, so improbable they make us want to laugh, to soaring sculpture of awesome power.
Harmonized very nicely.
With every advance in our mastery of flight, one institution has made it a mission to collect and preserve our accomplishments. From a plane that inspired millions.
You know, it makes you feel proud to be human.
To the suits that kept us alive in the vacuum of space.
These things kept people alive. They're the smallest spacecraft of all.
Armstrong scoops up a small sample of lunar dust and rock.
From the smallest to the largest, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum has amassed 100 years of aviation innovation and accomplishment, a collection that fills the world's most visited museum on the National Mall in Washington, and is starting to do the same in its newest structure, one so big it can display the first jumbo jet and the first space shuttle and still have room for much more. The story of this collection is nothing less than the ongoing story of our conquest of air and space. That story and the objects that are its legacy take new flight in a place known simply as America's Hangar.
Which has had such a tremendous impact on the war against
A state of we explore the reaches of space.
This nation should commit
1,400 feet, still looking very good.
Knowing that creatures like you did this in only 60 years or so, you know, it makes you feel proud to be human. It really does give you a sense of pride that human beings did go from the sands of Kitty Hawk to the dust of the Sea of Tranquility in such a short time.
The Smithsonian's aeronautical collection began humbly in 1882 with the simple gift of Chinese kites and a man driven by the impulse to fly. That man was Samuel P. Langley, the third secretary of the Smithsonian, who in 1896 launched the first of several large unmanned flying machines. These flights lasted only a minute or so, but back then were called a success. That's all it took for the Smithsonian to realize that flying was going to be big in the 20th century. So it put aside not only the 1903 full-sized Langley Aerodrome, but also a fighting version of the Wright Flyer, the world's first military airplane. When the U.S. Army Signal Corps asked for an observation aircraft in 1908, the plane most of us know from the sands of Kitty Hawk was adapted by the military to use in the field of battle, ushering in a race to improve early airplanes. The test flights of this Wright military flyer were witnessed by a boy who would grow up to become the guiding force for a new museum.
In a lot of ways, the National Air and Space Museum really is the house that Paul built. Paul Edward Garber was the first curator of the museum. Paul was there when the Wright brothers were making their first flights with a military airplane in this country, and it absolutely changed his life. That incident, the flights of this airplane at Fort Myer, Virginia, are the seed from which the National Air and Space Museum grew then.
World War I was when things started to really take off. The war efforts pushed the development of flight at breakneck speed. And part of the war's legacy was a host of new airplanes.
After World War I, they started getting airplanes, and Paul Garber started working here in 1920. He was called a preparator. He made model airplanes, but he was a great aviation enthusiast, and he kept bugging everybody to get more airplanes. He really made it almost impossible not to have an air museum. He collected so many wonderful airplanes.
But airplanes take up space, and the only extra space available was a temporary World War I building next to the Smithsonian Castle on the National Mall in Washington, D.C.
We had what we called a tin shed. It was a big former engine testing building right along Independence Avenue behind the castle. And that was the Air Museum.
When I helped to get the Spirit of St. Louis,
Paul got the Spirit of St. Louis. He asked the secretary to send a cablegram to Paris while the airplane was still in flight to get here. He knew he'd make it because he was an airmail pilot. And Lindbergh said, fine, I'll give it to you when I'm through with it.
Lindbergh captured the popular imagination of his time as he left New York on May 20th, 1927, and flew non-stop for 33 and a half hours to Paris. Over 100,000 people greeted him on arrival. After his triumphant return to America, he took his now famous plane on a tour of the United States and Central and South America.
He flew it here to Bowling Field across the river and said, here it is, come get it. So we have pictures of it being dragged in here with the tail in the back of a pickup truck and put it together.
Military necessity would once again launch a round of flight innovations. On December 7, 1941, a Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor sent America to war, not only against Japan, but against the Nazi war machine rolling across Europe. As America fought a war on two fronts, it became apparent that air power would play a decisive role in winning the struggle. Allied pilots were astounded at the maneuverability and handling of both Japanese Zeros and the German Messerschmitt fighters, as Allied and Axis warplanes screamed through the skies over Europe and the Pacific. War demands pushed aircraft technology and design ahead at a dizzying pace, quickly going farther and faster than most thought possible. Once again, a war had provided a treasure trove of legacy aircraft, and the Smithsonian needed a place to store them.
So Paul found the area which was called Silver Hill then. It's called the Garber facility now out in Maryland. And the airplanes were moved down over a period of years.
At Silver Hill, many aircraft were parked outside or packed away in crates waiting to be displayed. But before a new museum was even built, a new dream of flight was emerging, one that would surpass even the clouds and birds, manned flight beyond the Earth itself.
6, 5, 4,
when for the first time, man walked on a planet beyond his own.
Altitude now 21,000 feet, still looking very good.
The world's two superpowers of the time, the United States and the Soviet Union, were engaged in a space race.
Roger, we got you. We're going at
a contest that quickly became a race to reach the moon.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The huge amount of new science, medicine, and technology generated by the space race fueled the Smithsonian's own race for space. The tin shed was overrun with visitors, and rockets adorned the Smithsonian grounds.
It became the Air and Space Museum in '66 when we got into space, and we put the Shepard capsule in there, and we were drawing 2.5 million people then.
As the displays drew ever larger crowds to the National Mall, years of maintenance inaction was causing serious damage to the many planes still outside at Silver Hill.
There was a big fuss because the airplanes were deteriorating badly out, and we didn't have any buildings to put them in. They were sitting outside. They were sitting in water. We had one that had a tree growing through it. Not a big one, but a tree. Senator Goldwater got wind of it and said that it's a disgrace. We got to get a museum.
Decades after it was first proposed, museum construction was finally underway, but it wouldn't provide sufficient space for the ever-growing collection. Michael Collins, one of the original 3 Apollo 11 astronauts, would shepherd the building efforts as the new museum's director. Time was of the essence. The move-in had to be completed by July 4th, 1976, in time for America's bicentennial celebration. As the building rose on the National Mall, the museum staff began the monumental task of moving aircraft inside the imposing new marble and glass structure. It was big, longer than 2 football fields, and more than 8 stories high. On schedule, as America celebrated its 200th birthday, the National Air and Space Museum opened as a living monument to man's enduring quest for mastery of the air.
We all recognized, all of us who worked to open this museum, that it was really a pretty wonderful place and that it would be popular with people, but none of us, I don't think, recognized how popular it would be. Literally, the millions of people streaming into the building in those first opening months, that first year, we became the most visited museum in the world, and we're still that today.
Entering the massive museum from the National Mall, a dazzling display of aircraft from the first century of flight soars overhead in what is called the Milestones of Flight Gallery.
If you look around the Milestones Gallery, in those days, the world's first airplane, the Wright Flyer, was right in the center of the gallery, and now it's just right over here in a gallery all its own. But the real thing, the first airplane, and the Spirit of St. Louis, right above it, the Bell X-1, the first airplane to fly faster than sound.
Marked another milestone in aviation history.
The first spacecraft to take an American into orbit, the first spacecraft to bring the first human beings who had walked on another world home, and all of that in less than 70 years.
While some aviation pioneers concentrated on speed and altitude, others were creating something new for the traveling public: scheduled airline service. Hanging from the rafters in the middle of this gallery is a plane easily overlooked, but it is one of the cornerstones of air travel and helped usher in a new era of transportation.
We tend to take air transportation for granted now. It's become something that we all do, and we talk about the shrinking globe and that sort of thing. And commercial aviation is what did that. We're just a very different place today because of commercial air travel.
In the early years, flying passengers was not as profitable as flying the mail. What the airlines needed was a big, reliable plane that people trusted.
And the airplane that you see back here, the DC-3, is one of the most important airplanes ever built.
Previous attempts at commercial travel were expensive and the planes too small. The DC-3 was the first aircraft capable of an economy of scale, which made flying both affordable for customers and profitable for the airlines.
And they were such extraordinary airplanes. They were literally built to last. DC-3s are still flying in considerable numbers over 60 years after they were first introduced. During World War II, they saw yeoman service all over the world as C-47 transport aircrafts. A real achievement of American aviation.
As the DC-3 went to war, America and its World War II allies pushed new fighter and bomber aircraft into the aerial battlefield. And just as the soldiers returned with their stories, so too did their aircraft, and often they were intertwined.
This is the gallery of World War II aviation, and I have a great attachment to it because I was a pilot in World War II, and also I was the curator of this gallery. And so it means an awful lot to me because I sat through everything that happened here. We have one of each of a Japanese, a German, a British, and an American fighter in here. And then we have the Mach-E 202 here, an Italian plane. Was one of their top fighters. There's only 2 left in the world, and we couldn't get a B-17 in here, obviously. So we got Keith Ferris, a prominent aviation artist, to paint that mural there. This depicts an actual mission that took place on August the 15th of 1944.
It was a mission that ended tragically when the aircraft took a direct hit in the bomb bay, killing all but 2 of the crew. But this story was to come full circle some 32 years later, when a war widow came to visit a new museum with her son.
And she was here and looked at the painting and said, you know, that co-pilot looks like your father's eyes. And they walked up to the photo we have of the crew, and it was her husband who was killed. She didn't know how he was killed. She said it was the first day she'd known peace since the end of the war.
Perhaps that's part of what makes this place so special for so many, that the memories housed here are touchstones for events, large and small, that resonate in our individual lives. When on July 20th, 1969, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, he recognized this connection. It may have been the footprint of a single man, but this step was made on behalf of all of us.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility.
Let us go to the new worlds together. Not as new worlds to be conquered, but as a new adventure to be shared.
In less than the average lifetime of one individual, just 66 years, imagination and ingenuity carried us from a windswept beach in North Carolina to the airless sands of the moon.
Radar data. We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good.
That greatness, that genius and hunger to accomplish is embodied in all that is here, and for all to know as their own. The Space Hall of the museum traces our escape from these earthly bounds, from the earliest rockets to the people who followed.
This gallery represents the culmination of about 35 to 40 years of human space flight, and it's focused mostly on the human side of the house. So there's a discussion of the early efforts to go into space and to race with the Soviet Union to be first in space. And there's artifacts, and there is the story of the humans that were involved in the space race in the 1960s. John Glenn, Yuri Gagarin, Alan Shepard. The moon landings and the various spacesuits that were associated with those efforts.
Astronauts have made 6 trips to the moon and back. Each of these journeys has marked yet another milestone in our ongoing quest to push past the known toward the unknown.
Well, probably the most popular gallery that we've got here in the museum is the Apollo to the Moon Gallery. The story of the landings on the moon in the 1960s and the early 1970s.
Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
One of the important things that this particular gallery conveys, in fact all of the museum does, is the idea of progress and the sense that we are making strides in directions that no one has ever been able to accomplish before. It's remarkable that during the 20th century we went from being an earthbound people to being a people that flies in space, a spacefaring community that has gone to places like the moon, and we've sent our robot explorers even beyond that to every planet of the solar system, and humans will ultimately follow.
The Smithsonian's mission is much more than displaying artifacts. It is also about preserving them for future generations. 8 miles east of the museum on the Mall, in Suitland, Maryland, is the Garber Preservation, Restoration, and Storage Facility. It is here that the true preservation work of the museum is accomplished. Created in the 1950s by a desperate need to save the Smithsonian's vast collection of World War II aircraft, the Garber facility became the museum's backlot. It's the place where artifacts large and small are stored, rebuilt, and made ready for public display. And it houses treasures of its own.
We're in one of the storage buildings at the Paul Garber facility, and this happens to be the building in which we store the spacesuits. We store spacesuits in environmental storage units for their health and safety, so to speak. And this is the primary one that we use, and let's go inside and have a look. In here, I keep about 65 spacesuits, and they're not all of one vintage. I have here, for example, Alan Shepard's Mercury suit from his original Mercury flight, his Freedom 7. And this is Fred Hayes' Apollo 13. Mostly, however, this is where we store the lunar spacesuits. This one is Ed Mitchell's Apollo 14 spacesuit, and that is indeed lunar dust. Why do I work so hard to save these, or to look after them? I guess it's because in their particular bit of the world, they were very, very important. I mean, these things kept people alive. They're the smallest spacecraft known of all, is the way somebody once called them, and they are.
These suits provided the astronauts their only protection from the airless vacuum of space.
Each one is different. You know, that's an A7L, and it's beautiful. It's not dirty. It's in terrific condition. But it was from a mission, a very important mission where Apollo 13 nearly didn't come back. And so you have to preserve those.
And the spacesuits represent just a tiny portion of the many artifacts found here. Over the years, the Garber facility has grown into a complex of more than 30 buildings, half of which are used to store airplanes, spacecraft, engines, and other singularly unique aviation-related artifacts. With storage space at a premium, a team of highly skilled, multidisciplined experts have set up an assembly line of sorts to move objects from storage to restoration and then onto public display. Each restoration project challenges our understanding of how the object being restored fits into the history of aviation. What makes it unique? Why is it important? And finally, what should it look like? These are just some of the questions Karl Heinzel is grappling with as he supervises the restoration of a rare World War II German fighter.
This is the wings for a Heinkel 219. The Heinkel 219 was a late war radar-equipped German night fighter. This is the last surviving example of its type. It's a very unique, very interesting airplane. What we're working on now is the wing section, the fuselage, and the tail have already been done and are on display out at Hazy. Because of the outdoor storage conditions that it was in for many years, all the paint is flaked off the top of the wing. What we've had to do is to find some of the components that still had traces of original paint on it and develop a pattern for that.
Given its wartime status, this aircraft was built quickly for immediate use. But as the last remaining example of a technologically sophisticated plane, it now represents the historical reality that the Third Reich had reached an advanced level of innovation and accomplishment. But their empire collapsed before they could utilize it. The restoration specialists at Garber struggled to recreate its appearance and innovations exactly as they existed in 1945.
The Americans actually test flew this airplane, and when they did, they repainted it in this blue-gray paint. And so what we've done in a number of cases is sand through the paint that the Americans put over it to try and recover the original German paint and develop what their pattern was.
Often, these efforts require calling on the special skills of other Smithsonian experts.
I'm working with Dave, try to figure out the paint composition.
The same forensic skills used in restoring Renaissance paintings are being applied to determine the original colors of this plane. This attention to detail is important to the authentic restoration of these artifacts. Layers of plywood are re-glued, not replaced. Cables are spliced together using techniques of the period. And paint flakes are analyzed so that these restored aircraft accurately reflect the technology of their time. Once the work on the wing section is completed, the Heinkel 219 will be reassembled, and this early example of a radar-equipped night fighter will join the other rare and significant World War II planes on display at the Udvar-Hazy Center. And while many planes here played important roles in the war effort, At least one is considered either famous or infamous, depending on your point of view. This is the historic World War II bomber, the Enola Gay, the aircraft that dropped the first atomic bomb on Japan.
It's full restoration. Probably one of the best examples of that here that we've done at the Garber facility was the B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay.
We are standing in front of the first atomic bomber, the Enola Gay, a storied B-29 which carried the revolutionary atomic bomb to the enemy.
I've gotten the question, well, is it the real Enola Gay? Well, if we didn't have it, who would? We are the National Air and Space Museum, and that's where artifacts like that belong.
The restoration of the Enola Gay is the largest such project ever undertaken by the facility. It began in 1984 and eventually took more than 300,000 staff hours to fully restore the historic aircraft.
The B-29 Enola Gay is on display, fully assembled for the first time in 40 years. It was delivered to the Udvar-Hazy Center in 11 tractor-trailer loads.
We made the final approach toward Hiroshima, which the navigator hit right on the button.
That was done in piece parts here at this facility, then trucked out to the Udvar-Hazy Center for final assembly.
Bombardier took over, identified the target, and everything went with perfection not approached in the rehearsals. He did an excellent job.
We're trying to preserve everything we can, but whenever possible we use the original, or at least parts of the original. That's kind of our bottom line. We're trying to not rewrite or not change history, but preserve it and let people see it as it was and make their own judgments.
We have a sense of great moral responsibility to see that it is always used for good and never for evil.
Even before the opening of the National Air and Space Museum in downtown Washington, it was becoming increasingly evident that at some point in the future, a second, even larger facility would be needed. The museum's ever-growing collection of air and spacecraft included those too large to be housed at the downtown Washington facility. So in the late 1970s, the Smithsonian decided to build a new, larger facility near a regional airport. A structure that would provide the opportunity to tell the story of air and space on an even grander scale than was possible at the museum on the National Mall. But it would be October 2000 before ground was finally broken at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia. For the next 2.5 years, the building continued at a frantic pace. As the construction site was cleared, workers excavated more than 30,000 cubic yards of earth, enough to bury a football field under 18 feet of dirt. The giant structure, now named for major donor Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy, would house some of the world's most historic aviation treasures. Nearly 1,000 feet long and as tall as a 10-story building, the new facility is designed for a new millennium. In its huge open space, it celebrates the diversity of aviation with a spectacular, all-encompassing display.
The aviation hangar was planned over a number of years. Working with a large group, we were interested in providing some cohesive and logic to the layout, but also we're interested in the wow factor.
The hangar, with nearly 300,000 square feet of exhibition space, has more than 130 aircraft now on display and room for dozens of others to join them in the future. About half the aircraft on display are suspended from the ceiling of the giant hangar. Elevated walkways give visitors the opportunity to view the planes as if they were in flight.
We wanted to make it exciting when people come here and see aircraft not all lined up in rows and columns. With the aerobatic aircraft, some are inverted, some are climbing straight up, others are making a significant dive. That adds color and energy to the space.
Hanging these planes and filling such a vast space is no easy feat. It takes careful planning and engineering to complete this difficult task. Working on a computer modeling program, the designer is able to plan each object's placement for maximum visual impact. This tool also helps to determine structural hanging points and allows the cabling to be pre-cut and stressed.
Initially, they hang the cables from the truss, and so at some point the cables are just sort of dangling in space, and then they put a lifting device on the crane and then lift the aircraft up to the height where it's just above the height of the cables, which are suspended in the air. And then they transfer the load from the crane to the aircraft cables.
We try and keep things as dull as possible when it comes to hanging aircraft.
While the museum is built to take full advantage of its massive hanging area, it is on the ground level where some of its most prized possessions are displayed.
Sustained high altitude, over 80,000 feet.
One of the most popular aircraft at the Udvar-Hazy Center is the legendary SR-71 high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. Developed during the Cold War, the Blackbird is the world's fastest jet aircraft.
The Blackbirds brought into reality Mach 3 Plus cruise.
In 1990, in its last flight from Los Angeles to Dulles Airport, it set a speed record of just over 64 minutes, averaging 2,124 miles per hour from coast to coast. Flying at more than 3 times the speed of sound, the Blackbird was moving faster than a bullet fired from a .30-06 hunting rifle. But we may never know how fast it can actually fly. Its true top speed is still classified. Prominently placed in the middle of the Boeing aviation hangar, the Blackbird serves as the perfect entree into the Cold War gallery, where adversaries are often juxtaposed.
I'm the first to engage the enemy in all-jet air combat.
When MiG-15 jet fighters first appeared in Korea, they shocked American forces with their prowess and quickly made piston engine fighters obsolete. Even first-generation U.S. jets were no match for the high-speed, maneuverable MiGs. But that would change with the introduction of the F-86.
The F-86 arrived in Korea. It was very successful. It had an all-flying tail, so it did not experience the difficulties at high Mach that the MiG-15 did. It also had a very accurate weapon system. You can see that black dot on the nose there, that circle. That actually behind that is a radar for gun ranging, which rendered the system considerably more accurate than the MiG-15.
A new decade would see next-generation Soviet and American fighters once again going head-to-head. This time in Vietnam.
For much of the close support work, the Air Force resourcefully used a number of different aircraft.
One of my personal favorites here is the F-4 Phantom. I flew with the United States Marine Corps in the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam, and I will tell you that this F-4 Phantom is extremely sturdy. It got me home on a number of occasions when I didn't deserve it. In this particular one, you can see from that red star, which is on the intake, just forward of the engine, that indicates that this airplane, when it was flying with the United States Navy, was successful in shooting down a MiG aircraft. The MiG aircraft that we're talking about is just like this one, a MiG-21, a very agile, a much smaller aircraft. That was an advantage in as much as it was terribly difficult to see, but it only has one pilot. And so the F-4 had an advantage in terms of thrust, it had an advantage in terms of range and duration, how long it could stay airborne, and it also had the advantage of a cockpit crew of 2, that in this case, two heads were better than one.
These larger, heavier post-World War II planes claim valuable floor real estate. But this is a museum designed to impress with its scale. Located off a Dulles Airport runway, many of the larger planes have actually been flown to the museum.
There's probably about 8 aircraft that flew in. The Concorde and Dash 80 and the larger aircraft all flew in. They were all defueled and de-oiled out on the ramp.
The planes enter the hangar through 2 huge doors. They create an opening 140 feet wide and nearly 40 feet tall, and have a smaller doggy door for tractor-trailer-sized loads.
The doors have to be this large so that you can move in large commercial aircraft. The Concorde is wider than the width of the aviation hangar, With the computer modeling, I was able to pinpoint a pivot point based on this main landing gear.
The movers backed the aircraft to a pivot point, then swung the nose around with just enough room left to miss the circular staircase and to clear the tail of the Dash 80 with the Concorde's rear section. By placing the Concorde across the aviation hangar, it serves to visually delineate the commercial aircraft portion of the collection and creates a tunnel over the pathway, offering visitors the chance to walk under this aircraft. This is just one of the many ways in which the museum was designed with the public in mind.
We have lots of visitors that come in and say, if this is America's hangar, how come I can't get in the Enola Gay, and how come I can't get in the Concorde? And I tell them, if this were an amusement park, we'd put rubber, plastic, glass on all these cockpits, and we'd let people go through them. Dozens of our airplanes are the only ones left in the world. We want them to last hundreds of years, so the answer is we don't let anybody in them. But it's still a legitimate question. What does it look like inside? And we've satisfied that question with a number of kiosks that we have like this. So if somebody says, what does it look like inside the Concorde? I call up that Concorde. And I can look around the cockpit, I can go to the left, I can go to the right, I can go up and see what the pilot does, I can zoom in.
These interactive virtual tours allow guests to experience firsthand a pilot's point of view. In the case of the Concorde, the viewer is inside the cockpit of the world's first commercial aircraft with autopilot and auto throttle, allowing hands-off control of the aircraft from climb out to landing. Traveling at twice the speed of sound, the Concorde quite famously advertised, "Arrive before you leave." And at twice the cruising altitude of its conventional rivals, air turbulence was not an issue. Concorde travel was thought to be the height of style and convenience, the same elements that swept a much earlier commercial aircraft into prominence. One of the most beautiful planes on display, the Boeing 307 Stratoliner, was the world's first passenger plane with a pressurized cabin, which meant the Stratoliner could carry 33 passengers above the rough weather by flying at an unprecedented 20,000 feet. It was fitted with sleeper berths and reclining seats that swept air travelers into a new realm of comfort. The Clipper Flying Cloud, the Boeing Stratoliner on display at the Udvar-Hazy Center, was built in the late 1930s and was at the leading edge of commercial airline travel of its time. With time and advances, jets came to dominate commercial air travel, an industry that really came of age when Boeing introduced the Dash 80.
One of our most remarkable airplanes is the prototype for the Boeing 707, the Dash 80. And the one that you see behind me is the airplane that Boeing staked the company on.
Originally designed as a military transport and tanker, Boeing invested $16 million of its own capital in a daring gamble that once they built a prototype jet transport, customers would follow. They were right. With minor modifications, the Air Force bought the first of their KC-135 tanker transports. Next, Boeing turned its attention to the airline industry. Each year, in conjunction with a hydroplane race held on Lake Washington in Seattle, Boeing performed flybys with their newly designed planes.
In 1955, Tex Johnston took our airplane, this one on the floor, and actually did 2 rolls in this airplane to demonstrate its stability and control.
The stunt paid off, and the 707 became America's first commercially successful jetliner. Eventually, Boeing would sell over 700 KC-135 transport tankers to the Air Force, and about that same number of 707s to airlines around the world. Although the aircraft collection of the National Air and Space Museum is constantly expanding, rarely does the museum acquire an aircraft soon after its testing is completed. But that's exactly what happened in the case of the museum's Joint Strike Fighter.
This is the Joint Strike Fighter, and if you look at the tail here, you'll see a hat trick, 3 aces on the tail. What this airplane did that no other airplane has done, it took off in less than 500 feet, accelerated to supersonic airspeed, and came back and did a vertical landing. This is indeed a remarkably stealthy aircraft as well. Very reliable. I think it's the fighter of the future. If I had to make a personal prediction, it may well be the last manned fighter.
With a service life expectancy of 25 years for the F-35, the next generation of fighters might be remote controlled. Just as the World War II piston planes gave way to the Cold War jets, the days of the manned jet fighter could well be numbered. In addition to housing icons of aviation, the Udvar-Hazy Center also exhibits many artifacts of space exploration. Joined to the back of the Boeing aviation hangar is the 53,000 square foot McDonnell Space Hangar. Dominating the massive hangar is the Enterprise. Weighing more than 150,000 pounds, over 75 tons, the space shuttle is the heaviest object on display. It rests on a special foundation of concrete, 18 inches thick. The Enterprise was the first space shuttle and was built as a test vehicle for free flight and landings. It was not fully equipped for spaceflight, had no main engines, and did not have functional thermotiles. A primary objective was to prove that the planned shuttle fleet would be capable of gliding in as designed.
The 747 carrier aircraft took the Space Shuttle Enterprise up to about 25,000 feet. And some explosive bolts blew, and all of a sudden the shuttle was a free flyer, a glider. It's unpowered. So they were coming down quickly, and the ground was coming up quickly to meet them. The shortest descent from 25,000 feet was 2.5 minutes.
The Enterprise was turned over to the Smithsonian in 1985. Then, for nearly 2 decades, it collected dirt as it sat in a storage hangar at Dulles Airport.
In late 2003, we brought it into this hangar while the building was still under construction. As you can imagine, it had a lot of dust on it, a little bit of grime. Today, however, it looks beautiful.
Surrounding the Enterprise are space objects large and small, with representative artifacts from the beginnings of rocketry to present-day ventures into space.
There's a number of very interesting artifacts in this space hangar, and one of my favorites is this android, which was built in the 1960s to test spacesuits. And it's very interesting because if you look at science fiction, they always have robots in space. And robots, to me, is any device that goes into space that operates autonomously. How many robots actually look like a human being? One. And that's this thing right here. It was built to test spacesuits. You would install this inside a spacesuit. It could move and test the forces required to move the joints of a spacesuit. Obviously, a human being could do that, but if you were going to do it 8 hours a day, the human being could get pretty tired. This fella never got tired.
On display is an amazing array of remote devices that have allowed man to explore our solar system, from probing the formidable atmosphere of Venus to roving the surface of Mars.
Over here we have one that was very famous in the news when it went to Mars in the 1990s, the Mars Pathfinder. It landed with a set of airbags, which was a new concept at the time that cushioned its landing on the red planet. When it landed, it opened up like a flower. The Sojourner, it was called. It looks like a toaster oven with wheels on it and a little solar panel on top.
The first mission to place a rover on another planet, the highly successful Pathfinder, returned thousands of images, extensive wind and weather information, and over a dozen chemical analyses. It fell silent, probably due to battery failure, in September 1997, after nearly 3 months of daily data transmissions. The space hangar also displays a variety of model rockets, as well as a shuttle main engine, and follows America's progress in the space race from the early Mercury capsule through the Apollo landing. At every turn within the vast confines of the Udvar-Hazy Center, visitors find endless opportunities to discover and experience more about the fascinating world of aviation. In less than a century, we learned to fly, travel faster than sound, set foot on another world, and with our machines, reached far into the depths of boundless space.
The mission of the National Air and Space Museum is to commemorate, inspire, and educate.
With its unending mission to record and save for posterity the history of flight, the National Air and Space Museum is already planning major additions adjacent to the Udvar-Hazy Center.
One thing that I'm personally very excited about is the fact that we are about to commence phase 2, and that is the building of a restoration hangar. I think it's going to be a tremendous boon to the National Air and Space Museum to put our restoration work on display so you can see how all of this is done for America's hangar.
The story of our mastery of the air is still unfolding. It ignites an impulse so strong that it seems core to our human experience, the need to achieve. We banish the darkness of doubt with the illumination of our seeking, conquer fear by the genius of our understanding. And where once we stood humbled by what was above us, we now gaze down upon from our excursions of flight. The journey that marks our destiny in the skies will be forever imprinted and preserved at America's Hangar, providing inspiration for the pioneers of our future.